Colleagues, could you be so kind to connect via the link 10 minutes ago?
Angelica, you have to unmute your microphone. We can't hear you.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Angelica.
Hello.
Great.
Huh. Hi, Angelica.
Hi.
So now we can start.
Yeah, should we give people a couple more minutes to sign in?
Yeah.
Oh, why don't you put your splash screen on, Tiemae?
Yeah, let me go and screen share.
Angelica, if you haven't met the wonderful Tiemae Roquerre, here she is, and Tiemae, Angelica.
Hi, nice meeting you. Well, nice seeing everyone's face.
Yeah, can you guys see my screen?
Looks good.
Yep.
Make sure that I can actually go. Sometimes, okay, I'm having issues.
Just for GDPR reasons, is everyone okay if we record it?
Yes.
Okay.
I consent. Heartily.
Very good. Well, you never know. You may be dragging us through the courts afterwards. We don't have any money. Too soon.
The major consequence of recording this will not be litigation. It will be grateful appreciation.
Good. We might be embarrassed afterwards, but
yeah, well,
then
I'll claim it was a deep fake.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, actually, when Maria was still with us, I thought maybe she could do because her company is doing deep fakes. Maybe she could do something like one celeb inviting everyone to the webinar. Should be too difficult, but okay, maybe another
time. That would have been fun.
How many people do we have right now? Can't see.
Okay, so maybe we should start. 14 people.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Much less than signed up. I hope there's not an issue with the link, or just people.
Do you want to give it like a couple more minutes? I'm seeing people still entering.
Yeah.
Maybe someone else. Let's give it one more minute and then we'll start.
Sure.
I checked my clock and it was 12:02 and now it's already 12:03. So.
Okay.
Okay, why don't we get started? Okay, everyone, welcome to today's Joint Legal Hackers online event on deepfakes. We're so glad to have you join us. Oops, 1 second. My name is Tiemae, and I've been involved in Boston legal hackers for over 3 years now. And I've spent the last couple of years working in blockchain and consulting and helping build community in the computational law space with my friend Dazza, who'll be speaking today. And I like to I'm really excited today because today's event is the joint efforts of Moscow legal hackers, St. Petersburg legal hackers, Luxembourg legal hackers, and my home chapter, Boston legal hackers. And I'd like to thank Moscow legal hackers for spearheading and leading this, the organization of this event. And before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping rules or notes. Firstly, we decided to take the event from 2 hours and make it a 1 hour event instead. This way our friends over on the East Coast can get back to work and our friends over in Europe can have an earlier dinner. And second of all, there'll be a chance for speakers to answer your questions later on in the event. And so I'd like to remind you to post your questions in the chat box on the Skype. And thirdly, if you're interested in joining Legal Hackers, you can find out more at legalhackers.org. And if you go to the Global Chapters tab, you'll find more information about legal hackers in your city. Okay, so we're gonna get started now. Today, we will dive into many different aspects of deepfakes from, sorry, I'm gonna stop sharing. From what they are and how they work to the implications deepfakes are going to have on business, society, and the law. And in the true spirit of legal hackers, we encourage you to treat this event as a not as a deep technical guide, but more as an opportunity to help surface important considerations regarding this novel and world-changing technology. Points today will include what are deepfakes and how does the underlying technology work, whether or not we think deepfakes are beneficial or detrimental to society, and how deepfakes are currently regulated and how they should be regulated in the future. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dazza Greenwood. Dazza is the founder of civics.com and is also a researcher at the MIT Media Lab, where he has been advancing the field of computational law and building out law.mit.edu's research portfolio. Okay, Dazza, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tiemae, for that gracious introduction. And I am very, very pleased to be here with my friends of legal hackers from all around the world. So I'm going to do a little screen share here and put together a presentation. Is it coming through?
Yeah, it is.
Great. So why don't we start just by setting the table with what is a deep fake? And I was surprised and delighted to see that Oxford, the kind of authoritative dictionary people, have already got a definition because the word, although it's new, is now important enough and widely used enough to warrant a definition. So it's a noun. It's a video of a person in which their face or body has been digitally altered so that they appear to be someone else, typically used maliciously or to spread false information. I'm emphasizing those words because there's a legal overlay to what we're talking about, and intents like malicious intent or actual malice come up. And then I love their example usage. The committee hearing on worldwide threats cited deepfakes as a growing concern. So there you go. So here's a quick example. This is a fairly classic example. And it shows a scene from Man of Steel where actress Amy Adams, in the original on the left here, is modified to have the face of actor Nicolas Cage on the right here. So they did the face mapping using some deep fake technology. And you can just notice like the micro expressions with the little eyebrow raise at the end, the smile, the head tilts, the gestures. That is what we're talking about. And here's another one where, just to sort of raise the stakes a little bit, we do not necessarily endorse these products or services.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place.
Sorry.
Or, how about this? Simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele.
Here we go.
This is a dangerous time.
Excuse me. Sorry about that. I was trying to manipulate the screen. So I hope that you were able to see what appeared to be President Obama saying things that he would never say in a public address, certainly. Let me see if I can back here. Just want to double check, is my screen showing again?
Yes, it is.
So let me just go on by saying, so clearly there's, this is kind of funny, and there's, It's not all good and bad. You know, for purposes of parody or artistic expression, satire, this could be really, really great. I mean, people love impersonators, and now we can, you know, express that digitally in a way that we never could before. There's also serious potential problems. If we get back to the actual malice or malicious intent aspect of the definition from Oxford, we see here that it can easily be weaponized as a tool that can harm people. So let me just start before we get too deep into you know, legal frameworks with some common sense things that everyone can and that we think should do. These come from attorney Rosen Hagood from Charleston, South Carolina. And I just really like this. And I've been saying it to students. We had a deepfake graduate seminar on deepfakes at the MIT Media Lab this semester. And it's come up in other computational law courses. And so I think this is common sense. Just look for inconsistencies. Look for clues beyond the evidence itself. It's, you know, understand the rules of evidence. So this is now getting into when you're an attorney, and a lot of members of Legal Hackers are attorneys that are also technologists or very interested in using technology. This is going to come up in rules of evidence. And so, you know, understanding how to lay the foundation, raise objections, and have evidentiary hearings can be very important, which brings us right to hiring experts who can do deeper digital forensics. And there are any number of telltale signs, especially on the, I'll come back to this part in a moment, but in the mass market, sort of widely available free or low cost tools. They're not perfect, and you know, the trained eye and other forensic measures can detect them, deepfakes. And there are tools like TruePic, for example, can be used to create a kind of digital fingerprint or a digital signature. So authenticating or providing measures, providing the capability for video that you've produced or your clients produced to be verified and authenticated later is another common sense countermeasure. So that if there's a deep fake, you can show this what the authentic version was. What kind of, so now let's raise it a level of urgency here. What kind of risks are there? So I just mentioned the these widespread no or low cost tools. There are many of them, and you can get them for free. Just search your app store, do a Google search. So as you get widespread use of these tools, I think predictably, we're going to have an increase in the output of the tools. So there'll be a lot more deep fakes kind of flooding the media waves. And they're going to find their way into news and commerce and boardrooms and governmental decision-making bodies and judicial systems, as I just mentioned, these things attempting to be introduced as evidence, even by unwitting lawyers who might not even know it's a deep fake. So what are the implications? Existing norms that have relied on by default on certain types of evidence are going to be challenged. And we're going to have to go much deeper than we have before in terms of laying the foundation and authenticating evidence in a courtroom and beyond. I'll just keep admitting people. So more on the risks to privacy, obviously, individual reputations. There's risks to freedom of association. And in that sense, I mean, at least in the United States, we have a constitutional protection to associate with people that we want. And then that's also interpreted by our Supreme Court and other courts that we can't be forced to associate with people that we don't want to associate with. So you have deep fakes. If there's deep fakes, you know, putting me in a certain group of people or participating in some group activities, that could raise an issue for that freedom. Free expression, obviously, which also conversely is you can't force people to, forced speech is a violation of free expression. It's not just ensuring people can say whatever they want. You can't make them say other things. Well, maybe you can with a deep fake, or apparently can. Contract. So, you know, just at its simplest, you know, contracts can be oral and still enforceable by a court, of course. How it gets to the question of just contract formation. Like, did that person in fact make a contract? Or let's say you have two people that do have a valid enforceable contract. and one of them in a deepfake appears to breach that contract. I think there's serious contract questions that can arise. Copyright, maybe I should have put that higher on the list. So a lot of times these deepfakes start with source material, or almost every time that I can think of. There's some authentic source video, say, and then it's manipulated through deep learning algorithms to, face map basically another person on. That can be a violation of copyright if the material is copywritten, and material is copywritten by default as soon as it's made, even if you don't file it in the Copyright Office to get additional protections. Election security, and I think Angelica may go more deeply into that, but that almost speaks for itself. Fake news, judicial evidence, I've already foreshadowed. National security, I'm going to come back to in a moment, but if you read the Lawfare blog and other national security kind of wonks, you'll see that people are concerned about nation states or other well-resourced adversaries that may not be a nation state, again, weaponizing deepfakes in ways that can impact national security. I'll just leave it right there. So let me go back to see that top one, tort remedies. Let's just do a little deeper dive into that one. So what do I mean tort? What tort legal frameworks would apply? So I should have said at the top of my talk, I'm very much limited, I'm afraid, by United States law. And so my remarks are quite bounded by a US perspective. And so I very much look forward to opening this to EU and more international legal frameworks and learning from Angelica. But in the US, we've got defamation, slander, and libel is the first one. And the Electronic Frontier Foundation has a whole publication on the use of the existing frameworks against defamation as one legal remedy that can be used to combat deepfakes. False light, there's a tort against painting someone in a false light. Right of publicity more applies to celebrities, but they can have exclusive control over their likeness, their image, their name, and how it's used. This is can be a direct violation of that. The old Prosser tort of intrusion upon seclusion. That's one of the 4 classic privacy torts. So I'm just minding my own business. Could this be, represent an intrusion upon me just, having a tranquil life when someone introduces this? And that brings us right to, how do I feel when there's a deep fake that's really offensive and causing a lot of mischief? Maybe that's an intentional infliction of emotional distress. There's always others when you have clever plaintiff's lawyers in a tort cause of action. And so there may be many others. How are existing legal frameworks lacking? Well, in the US, the First Amendment's a go-to defense against tort actions that penalize free speech. So the defense extends to torts such as defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and others. And so that's an issue. Are people, exercising their right to free speech by doing a parody or by or other free speech, political speech, and so forth. So that's a major defense that almost swallows the cause of action for those torts. Similarly, proving intent, especially actual malice, is very difficult. Proving the inauthenticity of some deepfakes can be maybe not impossible. We may not have the tools or forensic methods at this point to do it. It's really an arms race, and we can get into in the discussion some of the tools to make deepfakes and tools to try to uncover when something's a deepfake. But you can imagine for sure that we can posit the production of deepfakes that would be impossible to disprove. So that can be an issue. And then most crucially, especially given the widespread use of these tools, and the potential for anonymity or covering one's tracks on the web and putting media out there, we might not be able to find the wrongdoers. Even if you could lay hands on them, if you could prove all the other ones, you can't have a right without a remedy, and you can't have a remedy if you don't have somebody to take to court. So those are some of the issues. There are some, misspelled agency, sorry, I'll fix that. But there are some examples of early legislative and agency efforts. There's in the US Congress, there's more than one bill that's been floated. HR 4355. Well, I should mention generative adversarial networks are one of the key algorithmic methods that power deepfakes, and I think they used it here just to try to get a acronym, I guess. In California, there actually are some bills that have become law that attempt to, in narrow contexts, combat deepfakes in political campaigns and in pornography. Painting people's faces on others in pornographic context is sort of the classic, or I should say, it's like the core use case of deepfakes. That seems to be what most of them do. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the sort of R&D part of the U.S. Department of Defense, has launched an entire research initiative aimed at creating better digital forensics for combating deepfakes. But that's not all. There's other potential measures that are a little bit more future-looking, but that are being discussed, and then some that I'll just say that are my own opinion. But the idea of an immutable life log as an, quote, alibi service if you Google that phrase, you'll see people are talking about it. That's the idea that you do one of the things I said before, which is try to create a way to verify your video, like by putting a hidden watermark, like with steganography, or better yet, a digital signature using a public-private key pair, using a private key, and then you are now creating and preserving some evidence. And so if you're kind of like videoing yourself all the time, or if you're saving video of every kind of public statement you've made, and authenticating it and doing some reasonable date stamp on it, which you can do by uploading it to a service that has its own logs, like archive.org or wherever, Google Drive. You can start creating this kind of immutable log, and you can utilize it as an so-called alibi, but basically to disprove the deepfake by showing the authentic evidence. More broadly than that, there is a legal hackers project that's still kind of simmering along called lawchain.org. That's a kind of a simple blockchain, but just for legal evidence and for digital date timestamp. So it's not cryptocurrency, but you can sort of like upload any arbitrary data file, like a video or a document, whatever, get a hash of that and digitally sign it and enter it onto a block on a blockchain. So thereby creating almost a public infrastructure service, so that anybody so that these immutable life logs could be as simple as just a simple upload or a one-click to get that date timestamp and to create verifiable evidence. Maybe some statutory reforms. So going back to this technology of a digital signature with a cryptographic key. Right now, so the real issue with this, let me go back one step in evidence. When you're entering evidence of a video showing something, whether it's like security camera footage or otherwise, it's a relatively low bar to lay the foundation to enter such a thing into evidence. So at least in the US, in our codes of evidence, admissibility of video is, I wouldn't say it's a presumption that it's admissible, but there's very little testimony needed once you have it and see it. It gets down to on the flyer for this event, is seeing believing anymore? We're kind of tuned almost evolutionarily as humans that when we see it, we can believe it, and that shows up by extension in some of our laws of evidence. Well, that may not be a wise default anymore when there's widespread prevalence of deepfakes. So maybe when you have evidence that's been digitally signed by a private key that a individual can show has been under their control the entire time, has not been compromised as far as they know, maybe they should get a rebuttable presumption that it's their video from their life log or from whatever that they've created that should be presumed to be authentic. and other video would not get that rebuttable presumption. I mentioned rebuttable presumption because, even those things can be faked. And so, so if there's enough money or other things at stake, people will do all kinds of crazy stuff. So we want the rules of evidence and adversarial, litigation to still apply, but maybe we just change the presumption for some of these things to encourage people to do the right thing by way of building in verifiability into their authentic video. And here's something which is sort of like an easy setup for Angelica, I hope, but maybe we could extend, I mentioned Prosser's 4 privacy torts. Well, there's actually a 5th tort that he didn't incorporate from Europe, but the so-called right of personality or dignity. On the face of it, that seems to be a very direct legal action that could be used to combat deepfakes by someone that's been wrongly victimized by a deepfake. So I'd love to learn more about that. We don't have that in the United States. If we adopted it, maybe that would help. Okay, so that is my sort of beginner's overview of deepfakes and the law, and maybe some pointers on how we can start hacking the law a little bit with our own methods to create and preserve evidence needed to combat deepfakes later. So with that, thank you very much. And I'd like to return the hot microphone to Tiemae Roquerre.
Thanks, Dazza. I had no idea that we had some regulations in place to help protect us from deepfakes, but clearly they have to be worked on. So I'm curious to hear what Angelica has to say about what's happening in Europe. Okay, so up next we have Angelica Fernandez, who will be giving us the EU perspective on deepfakes. Angelica is a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Law of the University of Luxembourg, where she holds an LLM in space, communication, and media law. Angelica is researching regulatory and governance models for online platforms in the context of artificial intelligence, and she's particularly interested in the regulation of technology markets, data privacy, IP, and media law. Okay, Angelica, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. I do not have slides. So I would just go like this. So first of all, thanks to Legal Hackers Moscow for inviting me to participate in this event. As you all know, I'm part of the Legal Hacker Luxembourg, so we are very happy to collaborate. And after Dazza's great presentation, I would like to raise a couple of issues from a legal perspective on the regulation of deepfakes, in particular from the European Union perspective. And my views are informed by my research into artificial intelligence, disinformation, and algorithmic content moderation systems, which I carry at the University of Luxembourg. So to start, I think the easiest way it will be to illustrate a case, a very simple case, and to then to sort of see the different implications of regulating deepfakes. And that's already discussed like all of the risk basically. But now I want to focus on a very specific dimension of it. So let us imagine we're in an election period and the race is very close between 2 opposing candidates. And there is a deepfake of one of the candidates involved in a sexual scandal that gets released just before the polls close. So from this scenario, 3 things that I need you to retain. The first one is that, a voter might change their views on a candidate given this last minute information. And therefore you can say that there is a real threat to electoral process, or at least that there can be an undermining of a democratic institution through manipulated audiovisual content. And since humans tend to trust what they see more than, written content or then audiovisual content poses a higher risk for deception. Second, this is released just before the poll close, right? The video, the deepfake. So how fast this information disseminates is a crucial aspect. So the speed and the scale are important. And this takes us to consider the role of online platforms or content distribution platforms, such as Facebook or YouTube, which is crucial when we talk about the legal implications of a deepfake or how to also counter it or to regulate it in an effective way. And it's also important because audiovisual media or content has also the potential to reach a very much larger audience in terms of media dissemination, typically than other types of content like, you know, radio, for example. And 3, I noted that it's a sexual scandal. And I wanted to bring this element into my little case, even if it doesn't show nudity, because then if the deepfake shows nudity, maybe, and is disseminated, let's say, into Facebook, then the algorithmic filters will probably catch it before it's released to the wider public. But even if it doesn't, and it's just like the sense, I wanted to bring it to, because of one element that Dazza also raised, that is that deepfakes are most commonly used in porn industry, and in porn revenge cases, and in cyberbullying cases, and for harassment purposes. So that's really the core. And it is to create, generally, to create reputational harm to the people whose face are used in depicting them things that they are not doing. So the lack of consent to disseminate their image, and thus is a violation of privacy and data protections, and also, as you mentioned a little bit, personality rights. But most importantly, and I think in Europe, it's about privacy and data protection, since personal and sensitive data are leaked against the victim's will. Now, this type of a scenario that I just described, my little case, is sort of like the type of a scenario that the European External Action Service was worried about in 2018, and that the US was worried already about in the 2016 presidential election. So in 2018, the European External Action Service identified deepfakes as this, as a type of audiovisual manipulation that threat in the context of disinformation. Therefore, they needed to put forward policies, measures to curtail risk during elections. And following this, in October 2018, we had the EU Code of Practice of Disinformation, which is a self-regulatory instrument that was encouraged by the European Commission. And it was the first time worldwide that the main online platforms, so Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Mozilla, and right now it even includes Microsoft and others, initially agreed on a voluntary basis to self-regulating standards to fight disinformation. And the document included a wide range of commitments that went from transparency in political advertisement to the closure of fake accounts, but also included deepfakes. So even though the word deepfakes in the code is only used once, the audiovisual manipulation that could represent a threat to the electoral process was clearly referenced. So obviously clear references to this idea of deepfakes that at the moment was really not that popular, like Dazza said, like the word now is widespread, but maybe some years ago, it was just nascent. So the code was somewhat successful in some of the key indicators after several independent assessments that were done last year and this year. But we don't have the data on how many audiovisual manipulations were caught, or like whether people could tag them. I mean, we really do not know. And also the difference between deepfakes and something that is similar to deepfakes, but it's not. So that's missing. But in all cases, the proliferation of deepfakes that was once feared never really happened during the EU parliamentary elections in the spring 2019, but also, I guess, not in the US also elections in 2020. However, in January 2020, Facebook announced it was banning deepfakes from their platforms because of all this pressure, bringing attention to the issue of deepfakes again. The policy obviously was related to the upcoming 2020 US presidential elections at that time. And that brought also the question of the state of the art of the technology that was needed to counter the threat effectively. So I know, and maybe Dazza could speak more about it, because I'm very interested about this deepfake detection challenge. And I guess it was carried also with MIT, or if I'm not mistaken, with Facebook and MIT. In their policy, the company provided 2 criteria to determine whether a video could be labeled as a deepfake and subject to a ban, therefore, in their sites. And the definition sort of identified 2 elements. First of all, that it has to be misleading or deceptive. And second of all, that is a product of AR or machine learning. And the criticism was immediate. So first of all, there was a choice, there was a criticism on the choice of the wording, meaning whether the definition of a deepfake could only include a speech, or would a video of someone doing something that they did not want would also, that they did not do, sorry, would also classify as a deepfake. So for most people, Facebook defined very narrowly what a deepfake is, and that it was in contrast to the consensus that we're already building about what a deepfake means. And this is really important, as Dazza say, for the law. So that's why I bring it up. Other critics focus on the technical difficulties of actually detecting if there's been artificial intelligence used to modify a video. So drawing the line between what they call a cheap fake and a deep fake became very tricky. Finally, some critics were concerned about how this new policy interplay with Facebook well-known policy on exemption on fact-checking politicians' ads, which in turn enables disinformation on their platform. So, so for example, will this, so for example, if the deepfake were to appear on the profile of a politician, would this still be covered by this policy, or will it be exempt of it? So the type of, because the type of deepfakes that will probably be harmful to democracy, and then in the context of disinformation, which probably be with the face of someone that is really well known or a politician, right? Nevertheless, most experts applauded the small steps that fakes has given in the right direction by acknowledging deepfakes as an emerging threat. So my first conclusion will be that this critics reveals that there's still a consensus to be built on what the level of threat of deepfakes represents for election integrity. Second, and this is how do we take account of low-level tech audiovisual manipulation in all of this debate? Because lower tech media manipulation is also a threat to democracy and harmful to individual reputation, and could also be used, for example, to distort evidence, as Dazza said. And so how in law and policy, or how law or any regulation is supposed to draw the line between these two related information manipulation or creation, sorry, in order to have effective regulation or effective right safeguard. So that's a question I have, maybe that we can debate after. And that's why I brought this Facebook point, because I think that the definition that we're building right now will be so important afterward to carve out an effective regulation. And now on the regulation, I would like to bring some of the interesting policy and law developments happen in the European Union. And overall, I think some of you might have heard that the EU is shifting for a stronger set of rules to protect users in the digital sphere, in particular related to online platforms, which, as I already mentioned, are the content distribution platforms through which usually deepfakes will be disseminated. But also these new rules aims at regulating the online media ecosystems to avoid this sort of information warfare or weaponizing of deepfakes that Dazza was talking about. Several pieces of legislation are in the making, but I will comment on two that I think will have an impact on whether we will see deepfakes emerge as a widespread threat or not in the context of online platforms, sorry. So last week, the Commission adopted the European Democracy Action Plan, subtitled Protecting European Democracy from Interference and Manipulation. I think that sort of already tells you what sort of manipulation we're talking about. The purpose of the action plan was to ensure that citizens are able to participate in the democratic systems through informed decision-making from unlawful interference and manipulation. And the goal is to have new rules in place with sufficient time ahead for the May 2024 European Parliament elections. And obviously it builds on the Code of Practice Information Strategy, which I already talked about. And because of it, it does target deceptive audiovisual manipulation. So there are a lot of clues in this plan of what is to come and what the Commission will sort of develop. There is a toolbox that is going to be developed. There is also the idea of maybe in fostering, trying to identify what type of the manipulative techniques are being used. And there we can think about the way in which deepfakes are produced, and then try to develop more that expertise for regulators, but it's still very vague. And then the other more discussed upcoming legislation is the Digital Service Act package, which is planned to be adopted the latest next week. So there, the DSA, or Digital Service Act, will propose a horizontal framework for the regulatory oversight, accountability, and transparency of the online space in response to the emerging risk. And what's interesting is that it's obviously rules that are going to apply to these big platforms. And one of the parts of it is that that now platforms will have to develop appropriate risk management tools and take measures to protect the integrity of their service against, and I quote, the use of manipulative techniques. And there we can obviously include deepfakes or generally audiovisual manipulation. And most importantly, for a case of deepfake, is that the DSA, or the Digital Service Act, will provide users with meaningful possibilities to challenge the platform's decisions to remove or to label content and to have like actual remedies. And this is also something that Dazza talked about, and it's the fact that when a deepfake is in one of these platforms, it's really difficult to trace who was the person who created it, right? And therefore, someone who is harmed by it has little to no recourse, or it will cost him too much to find out. So it's really not efficient, which is why I think this sort of legislation, which is more horizontal, also more general, will empower more and will also help to prevent this sort of malicious deepfakes to proliferate in these platforms, and therefore to protect better consumers or users at the end. The DSA would also establish a co-regulatory backstop for the measures which would be included in a revised and strengthened code of practice of disinformation. So there will be a second code of practice on disinformation. And if the first one already sort of teased with the idea of deepfakes, I'm sure that the next version of it will totally go into deepfakes. And this is, and then also the commission, that's really important in both documents, says that they will try to maybe develop a specific set of rules during election periods, and maybe would also be thinking about the sort of impact that deepfakes could have in preserving democracy and countering disinformation generally. So to finish, I know that I have only addressed a specific type of concern regarding deepfakes, and that surely there are other domains that are probably less problematic, for example, using deepfakes in the entertainment industry to make movies. However, I wanted to bring this particular challenge to the discussion because it's a reason why I think that regulation is so important, because deepfakes are being used right now to harm people's reputations, but also increasingly, I think they will be used to undermine governments. There is this whole, I guess, literature, but also policy debates on human rights activists and the use of evidence. So that's another angle that we could discuss on deepfakes. And I think that with our regulation, we will create this environment of uncertainty and doubt, because then deepfakes can make people question if it's what is real is fake. And this is really important if you go to court. Thank you, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Angelica. That was fascinating. I feel like I'm left with so many questions now. We actually have some time for you and Dazza to do a little panel, so that, because I noticed both of you guys had questions throughout both presentations. So this might be a good time to facilitate that. And before we get started, I actually had a question for you. Or for both of you guys. So Dazza had mentioned during his talk how one idea that he had for creating more transparency or creating an alibi was for people to have this like life log, and kind of create this like immutable record of like where you've been or what you've done. But it sounds like that's at odds with like the European ethos of like privacy and data protection, because when you have an immutable record, obviously that record exists somewhere and is, I don't know, subject to discovery. So I was wondering if both of you guys have thoughts on how the United States and Europe can work together to combat deepfakes, or whether they're like at odds with each other. So
I can go first, I think, if that's all right. Great. So I think that's an excellent question, as usual, Tiemae. And my first thought on that is, if an immutable life log, as it were created such that, like YouTube, say, so that you, like, say, upload your video to a public place and digitally sign it, that would definitely create questions such as conflicts potentially with right to forget, or, and I think that's what you're getting at, or maybe you want to have evidence of things that you said that were relatively private, or at least not meant to be set for public viewing, but you still wanted to create the evidence, then, you know, then there's issues again with privacy, if that was your only option, and are you being coerced to expose more than you'd want to? But that brings us directly to, well, you don't have to set the system up that way. So just cryptography 101 would be, might be helpful here. So you could, with a digital signature, what you get when you digitally sign a file is actually just like a little box of, like a string of characters. Like that's the digital signature, which you can use to verify that a file hasn't been changed since the time it was signed, and that it was signed by a given party that has the private key corresponding to the signature, which you authenticate by verifying the signature with a public key in the key pair between a public and private key. So that's cryptography 101, public key cryptography. So if you were to upload just the digital signature, then there's no source material at all. And you could then keep the underlying video like in a hard drive buried in the dirt under your house, under your bed or whatever, you know, and like, you know, protect it as bright in a safe as much as you want, shoot it into space. So long as you can retrieve it later when you want to then apply the signature to it and show this was the authentic video. So I think that there are some technical ways to preserve and balance, you know, people's various interests in privacy, you can still create and preserve evidence needed to combat deepfakes. And I think there's probably also going to be a need for some legal reforms as well. Like, where's the public utility service for a date timestamp? Like, to make everyone have to be a computer scientist and you know, like an engineer and like systems architect in order to create and preserve evidence is not a good answer. At some point, you know, just like we don't all need to create, an electric grid and a system of roads and bridges, like at some point, or a telephone or internet service is maybe closer. At some point, we're going to need public utility-like services that can be cheap, but can enable a capability at population scale for people to do fundamental things like create a log. And this is good generally for receipts and for commerce and just creating evidence. But, you know, this deepfake phenomenon is really putting a sharper focus on why we might need these things. So it may not just, so our complacency with digital public infrastructure, I think hopefully will be overcome soon with a demonstrated and growing need to have the right to give people digital tools to exercise their citizenship and their freedom.
So my turn. To that, I think, to the original question, I think we might be at odds, the European Union and the US, depending on where we store this information. So if it's stored maybe in the EU, then it would not be too complicated with the data, then it's sort of anonymized or encrypted or something and like that is compliant with the General Data Protection Regulation. And also if there's a consent by the person, so the person actually wants this information to be stored. But I think, and if we see it that way, that a lot of deepfakes are also non-consensual. So we might have a problem there, because even if one takes all the precautions to sort of log your life and, you know, have it stored, that doesn't mean that you're immune to like having a deepfake or you somewhere, and then, you know, we're back again to the same trouble, to the same issue we're now. So I think that's why it's important not to have too much techno-solutionism, maybe I'll be provocative there, and I'm more relying on actual regulation that gives users remedies to actually, I mean, if it's non-consensual, then what? Yeah, so that was a point I had. And I have actually a question for you, because when you talk about it, I already thought of it when you presented the different ideas, but you didn't talk about authentication at capture, which I think is more relevant, because maybe, for example, for human rights activists that wants to record something that is happening, like, you know, some police, you know, police violence or stuff like that, and then it will be more useful for that person to, in the moment, try to, I don't know, activate an app or something that will allow them to afterwards in court say that this was authentic and it's not been tampered with, and it's just it's not possibly a deepfake. But I don't know the state of the technology in that sense, so maybe you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, thanks, Angelica. That's great. My bad. I should have mentioned that. I'm so glad you brought it up. So the two things I said that were similar was lifelog, the immutable lifelog, and this law chain idea of creating, more like what I just mentioned in my previous answer to Tiemae's question, like more of like a service where you can date timestamp things. But those are one step away from capture. And so when you bring up capture, that really, I mean, the best time to create and preserve evidence of something is the instant it's born, because then it always raises the question like, well, did somebody sneak a deep fake like in my transmission stream when I was putting it on a log? Anyway, you want to get it at capture, at birth, as it were, at creation. And so there are technologies that do that. Now we're really getting into to make it truly secure hardware, not just software. And I would invite people to Google or whatever, Bing or Alta Vista or whatever you want, the phrase secure enclave. Secure enclave. And so this is getting right down to the chip level. And it's just some technology that customarily has been used to authenticate a device itself, but it's being expanded a little bit by the Intels and the chip people of the world to allow more functions, including digital signatures on things like files being created and received and modified. So that, and then are some things on cameras that can secure like the EXIF metadata and things like that. So that is a point very well taken, and that honestly, from a technology perspective, that would be the preferred answer. Part of the reason I didn't focus on it, I guess, in retrospect, was I was thinking, what's stuff that's relatively low cost that we can roll out now, population scale, and the hardware stuff is like it really expounds the cost and complexity and the supply chain and like who's going to pay for that and why, and would the manufacturers do it and all that. But from a technical kind of clean room perspective, logically, you've got it. And then I hasten to add what you said, I totally agree with. Like, so we could have this secure technology stuff, but that's only at half at least of the solution. The main thing are the legal frameworks. But I'm glad that we're both also on this technology kick, because legal frameworks to some extent are only as good as the evidence we give them. It's like you got to meet them halfway and give something someone can authenticate. So thank you. So can I put a call out to all the good peoples out there? I see participants, and I know that the chat's working because I've had some side conversations going with some people. Like, if you have any questions, ideas, comments, objections, whatever, musings, bring them. We'd love to talk with you.
We can even unmute you if you want to just shout it out, not in the chat.
Yeah.
Just raise your hand. There's a button to raise your hand.
I can create a deep fake of you asking a question if you don't. So how's that for motivation? Looks like Chris is on the line. Let me ask to unmute. I believe this is a stalwart legal hacker from Italy. So Chris, if you'd like to unmute at least your audio, and I invite you to unmute your video if you choose, go right ahead. Your audio is muted right now. Are we able to unmute people's audio? Maybe that's someone else's department.
No, can't see.
Maybe you could type your question in the meantime, Chris, just because we're having issues unmuting you. Where did he go? Oh, ask to unmute. I can ask to unmute. Is there a super host? Oh, here's chat. Oh, okay, we've got a big thing in chat. Should I just read it? Or do you want to read it, Tiemae? Okay, I'll read it. Based on this question on your face. In case there are no better questions, okay, he's very polite. Here's a bit of a dystopian one. Ooh. How about a framework for a, let someone in. how about a framework for legal and ethical use of deepfakes with an advanced conversational AI application, in certain controlled context. Intuitively, it involves digital identity and property rights of one's own persona's digital manifestations. For example, training educational deepfake of a coach, mentor, colleague, teacher for use by trainees, even when the trainer isn't really there. Companion deepfakes, isolated people at home or in the hospital, retirement houses would like to have relatives and friends converse with them, even when they're not available or willing, perhaps. Scenarios belonging more to Philip K. Dick or William Gibson novel, but well taken. And, you know, that really comes down to this whole question of identity. And so I think Angelica, I'll just start if I may, but Angelica, you sort of brought up the question of Hollywood and actors, and that's a whole thing in Hollywood right now. There's a big debate. I noticed prepping for this panel, I'm not really in those circles, but in the trade rags and the lawyers that represent them in the whole industry, people are very concerned about not just the right of publicity, but then this other thing. So what can you do with the deep fakes of people? Well, could we, and then some novels have already taken this all the way. You could sort of like get a snapshot of like an actor or actress in their prime, have them sign away rights to it and churn out as many movies as you want with that person acting however you want to make them act. They could do that legally, right? And this could be another revenue stream for some of these actors and actresses. And they can do it. And so to Chris's point, like, could you have a family member basically spawn these mini personas of themselves, create parameters for grandma? Like, I like to talk about cooking and how's the family and my health. And those seem to be the big three. So here's like a chat bot powering like a fragment of my persona. And I'll put that at visiting hour every day with grandma in the old folks home. Or could it be done by your evil brother or my evil brother who makes me say horrifying things that I have to unwind over years with grandma and to promise it really wasn't me? So anyway, I think that is a very provocative question, and there's some initial musings on it.
I see. I mean, I don't think it's so dystopian. I mean, the idea of deepfake companions, because then the person could actually say, I want to be part of this because I want to help my grandma who's in a retirement home, and we'll give actual permission to use their image, to record the voice, to have like the little keywords and everything that makes them sound that this person. So I think that could happen very soon. I don't think it's so dystopian. And about the Hollywood thing, actually, that already happened. It was in Star Wars, right? That they use. I don't remember, Princess Leia, I think, who was used, like they swapped the face from the old actor to the actress to the new one or something like that. And I saw several presentations on that, and they were fascinating. But more into media law, and I cannot talk about it that much, to be honest. But I think it's also the same impression. There's a really big debate right now in Hollywood and how to design these contracts in a way that that the people who are leaving their image rights for later on, like famous, I don't know, James Bond or whatever, like the iconic type of roles could be used later on. And yeah, man, that's about as much as I can say right now. I haven't explored that. Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's not a,
but it's fascinating.
It's not a proper legal hackers event if we don't bring up Star Wars at some point. Alternatively, Star Trek, I would give credit for. And so I think they did it also, if I remember correctly, with one of the admirals who had like an iconic face, the actor was no longer alive. So it's definitely happening. God, that brought up another. Well, I'm sorry, can't remember. What you said so much there brought up.
But I've also seen a lot of trainings going on to how to draft these contracts in a way that the image, especially in France, I've seen that they could be preserved on all days and used in the media industry. So yeah, I see that someone has their hand raised, and actually I know this person. So Professor Mark Cole, which is specialist in media law, so that would be great.
Well, hello everyone. I think you should. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes.
I pressed unmute. I don't think I can put the camera on, but that's fine. Actually, I can.
Oh, hello. Actually, may I ask first, Tiemae and Holger, can we have unanimous consent to go like, 3 or 4 minutes beyond the hour? I know we'd set expectations.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Just want to make sure Mark has an ample opportunity. Okay, thanks. Excuse me, Mark.
No, don't worry, don't worry. So I'm supervisor of Angelica. That's why I found out about this event. And I had class regrettably until 7:30, so I couldn't hear your actual presentation at the beginning. But the last comment that was given brings me to a thought. Could one not, I don't know whether you discussed this, but could one not think about categorizing fakes, deep fakes, by good and bad intentionals, for example, to say, okay, if an actor signs off on that right, it's like the robots in old persons' homes. If people are happy to talk to them, that's fine. And for some which are deceiving, like people using them in order, to get a political message through, like Angelica said before. And if so, to maybe restrict the legal framework to a identification that we might have as well already, for example, in media law, an obligation, at least in Europe, not in the US, I know, to identify if product placement is used. So advertisement that is not separate from the content, but that's within the content. There has to be an announcement at the beginning saying, okay, the following show uses product placement. Or you have some logo at the top right corner. And that we could maybe limit the legal intervention to saying, we put an obligation out there, social bots are being used or deepfakes are being used. Because then in that moment where you do that, automatically the legal use, high grammar, it's not actually me speaking, or this is not the real actor. We use, that's at the beginning, at least people would know. And for all other cases, you could then automatically say, most likely that is some form of illegal use, a real fake, because they're trying to deceive us. Or do you think we will have a world ahead of us, like Chris has suggested there, where it will be everywhere and nowhere, and it will be difficult to make that distinction?
I have some thoughts, but Angelica, did you want to?
Well, I'm also eager to hear you first. I mean, I have some thoughts also, but you can.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So that's very constructive, and actually, I have to say, I'm going to put a different hat on. What you just said is in the spirit of hacking, I would say, and that's the question of, in the following sense, how do we proactively engineer and find good solutions and build them systemically into our processes, including legal processes, and support and reflect them in technology and kind of, built systems. And so kudos, number one, you're in the right place today. And on the merit of it, I would say that is a good idea. And so if you are able to get the video later of this, in my remarks, one of the things I mentioned was a so-called immutable life log. But that kind of gets us down to identity and authorization, and then proving something was authentically yours. And then for rules of evidence, I was talking about maybe one of the things we can do going forward as people create and preserve verifiable evidence of what happened, including this was me, right? And I authorize this. Being able to say, tweak the rules of evidence slightly so there's a rebuttable presumption in favor of that. And then if someone sees that there is something that doesn't have that watermark or that digital signature, maybe the presumption shifts to, I didn't do it unless you prove I did, and maybe even a higher bar. And you could defeat it quickly with evidence that had that little thing you could click in your example. And the only other thing I'd say is, I was going to mention this earlier before I lost the thought, and I think it's very relevant to Professor Cole's idea, is in Wyoming right now, I'm helping on a select committee in the legislature to develop, I guess I'd say, a next generation digital identity law. And it really focuses on an individual's digital identity that is theirs. So it's not like the account that they set up in Google or their employee account, but it's, some people use this phrase self-sovereign, that has a lot of baggage with states and things and politics. We were calling it a personal digital identity. And so if someone's doing making act or communication from their personal digital identity, being able to show that with a watermark or something, that this was me and I was that actor, or this is me and I was that grandson, as it were, and being able to click it is exactly some of the types of tools and capabilities that we imagine should be built out to give life and breathe expression and usefulness into having a legal building block of digital identity. But I think we, the road ahead of us is going to be full of fun and engineering and hacking in order to raise our game to start meeting these challenges. And I think the best way to look forward in some sense is look backward. Fundamental precepts and principles of law, especially post-Enlightenment, are very well tuned. We just need to now refine them in light of these new circumstances and build ideas like Professor Cole's.
Now you mentioned that, going back, I mentioned it in my presentation, that it's about, because what is a deepfake? I think it goes back to the definition, because if the starting point right now, and it seems to be consensual, is that a deepfake is only a deepfake, and we can call it like that when it's malicious and it has a malicious intent or is deceptive, then whatever is not there is not a deepfake. I don't know how we're gonna call it, audiovisual manipulation or whatever, but it's not a deepfake technically, with this type of definition. And to create effective regulation, then we need to get on board on, okay, our deepfakes could be malicious and non-malicious. And then if that is a more, a broader interpretation of what a deepfake is, then of course this type of measures could be envisaged into regulation, because we will be thinking, oh, how do we distinguish both of it? But right now, apparently, according to Facebook and according to everyone who writes about it, it is only for malicious and deceptive intent. So yeah.
Great, thank you guys so much. So it's a little bit over the hour, but I think it was worth going a bit over time. Clearly, there are some questions about what deepfakes even are and how we should be regulating them, or how we can help make it more obvious to both users and creators how they should disclose deepfakes or manipulating images and videos. I'm sure we'll have a lot more interesting conversations about this in the future. And for now, if you guys want to check out more online legal hacker events, we have a bunch of them because of the pandemic. We've been having these amazing collaborative joint events, and you can find out more about them again at legalhackers.org. And yeah, thank you guys so much for joining, and thank our speakers and organizers for putting together this really amazing event. Have a great rest of your day.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. See you soon.
Thanks. Bye.